Well, a very good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and welcome to another episode. This is the Life Signatures Radio from whatever place it is you're tuned on. Thank you so very much. We are in the middle of a series. We have been discussing this for eons, for quite a long time now, maybe a month now. We've been talking about blockades, personal blockades, and yesterday we just started talking about the fifth kind of blockade. Now, these episodes, this podcast is always going to be about purpose, productivity, and resilience, and anything in between there. If we're talking about blockades, actually it deals with purpose, it deals with productivity, it's also dealing with resilience. If this podcast instructs, motivates, inspires, or does something positive to you, it means that it can do the same to somebody else. So please make them a favor and share with them. And if you want to contribute back to the podcast author, podcast show host, please click on the link that has been provided on the show notes. Today, let us go deeper into what we started talking about yesterday. Stay tuned.
Welcome to the Life Signatures podcast with Lawrence Namale. Lawrence is a life coach, author, and keynote speaker who loves to tackle different topics on purpose, productivity, and resilience. His mission in life is to awaken all your boundless possibilities available in you. Life Signatures podcast is dedicated to bring to reality every single person who knows that deep down in their gut, there's got to be more to life than this. And now, here is your host, Lawrence Namale.
Let us do a recap. We have been talking about blockades. Number 1 blockade is the mental blockade. Number 2 blockade is the cultural blockade. Number 3 is the spiritual blockade. Number 4 is the self-concept blockade. And now number 5, we are talking about the blockade of experiences, reality. Nothing speaks louder than reality. When you're in a hospital bed, it's so real. You know, you might even start conjuring up things like, I'll never make it out of this place, because of the pain is just absolutely real. The environment in which you're living is just real. You cannot ignore it. You cannot ignore experiences. Now, if we can go deeper into talking about experiences, there are some things that I want to just separate so that we can be able to understand exactly what this is. The first thing I want to talk about today is fear. If we are examining these attitudes, we talked about attitudes in the episode yesterday. If we're examining the attitudes that come to us from the experiences that we're going through. I wrote about this in my first book ever, Turn Your Setbacks into Major Comebacks. And I say that sometimes experiences cause you to have illusions of the future. Let me just give you an example. You might be broke at this moment in time, and this experience is so real that you start imagining that this is how it's going to always be. You can't imagine a break. You can't imagine that it's going to be better. You can't imagine that you'll ever own a laptop. By the way, that's me. You can't imagine that you'll ever drive a car. You can't imagine that you'll ever have a family of your own. You can't imagine that you'll ever have bliss in your marriage. You can't imagine all these things. Why? Because of the reality on the ground right now. It is so real. It is so undeniably real. If you are living in a country where there is one party system and there is oppression, I lived in that particular state, by the way. You couldn't imagine that there's ever going to be a multi-party democracy. You couldn't imagine that it's going to be a country without that particular president. It was President Daniel Toroitich Arap Moi at that moment in time. And you'll excuse us to believe that way. I mean, we'd lived decades and we'd seen what he was capable of doing. The reality we faced caused us to think that this is how it's always going to be. So experiences are not things that you can easily wash and wish away. They create inside of us some of these elements, some of these attitudes. And the first attitude that experiences normally create is the attitude of fear. Fear is one of the most debilitating forces. I cannot begin to quantify the value that people have lost. I cannot begin to quantify the amount of revenue people have lost. Never ever gonna make it the world over because of fear. I cannot even begin to quantify what the world has not even begun to see because someone somewhere had an idea but they were afraid. They were afraid not from out of the blue, they were afraid because of reality for the most part. Fear is the greatest of these attitudes, these blockades. This blockade that comes up is a blockade of fear because of the experiences that we go through. It tells us that when we were born, we only have two kinds of fears. If you read, the fear of falling and the fear of noise. All the other fears are caught. They are learned. We didn't have these fears in our psyche, in our makeup when we were born. Remember that saying, a child is born tabula rasa, where it means that a child is born with a clean slate, you can just paint anything that you want on that particular child. And it's true, by the way. That's why sometimes a suicide bomber did not become a suicide bomber yesterday. It became a suicide bomber through childhood. Tabula rasa, through painting that clean slate of theirs with words and lies such as, when you die for the cause, you're going to go to heaven and you're going to get 69 virgins. Now, let me just discombobulate that particular lie and tell you this. First of all, if you're going to heaven, you've got to understand that heaven is eternity. Eternity is not 69 days. Some of you are so greedy, you will not take 69 days to go through 69 virgins. Some of you will take less days. True. And now, after that, what happens? After 69 virgins are done, what's going to happen to you? It's because you're going to that extent because you are painted, your clean slate was painted with these innuendos, these lies, and you believe them hook, line, and sinker. And it's the same way with fear. Fear finds a very clean slate in our psyches as we're growing up. And how does it find it? It finds it through experiences that we go through. And these experiences, they're the ones that prop up this fear, this blockade. Where we try to do something and we get feedback. We get feedback and this feedback tells us, nah. And now we learn and we say, okay, maybe not. But before that, we had this confidence. I can tell you stories upon stories. You know, I was working for an organization and I thought that everybody, I didn't know. So naive was I. I didn't know that there is politics in business and there is politics at the workplace. I did not know that. I discovered that people have agendas, hidden agendas. I was so naive to think that the agenda of progress was shared across the board. But there is an agenda, there is an overriding agenda against progress, and it's the agenda of selfishness, self-centeredness. Of course, they think they're progressing, but they want to progress at the expense of other people. And so I was out there, man. I was with the illusion that everybody is on board and everyone wants to grow. And I was working, man. Until I faced opposition. And when you look at this opposition, first of all, it's insincere. You find an old man, as in twice as old as I am, lying in a meeting, in a CEO's meeting, lying about me. Man. And I discovered, it is not the same. And from that particular moment on, some element, you see, this is what we face. We face experiences, and these experiences can create in us some things. And one of the things that is created is normally fear through experience. Someone who goes out and attempts to do something and then fails will almost always, obviously, by the way, when they experience the fear, they experience the failure, they will have this fear of failure. They do not want to fail again. In fact, the fear might not self-manifest, by the way. It will simply be tucked away benignly in a form of a blockade. Yeah, I'm not afraid. But you are. It's just that there's a blockade that you'd rather front a blockade than say that you are afraid. And when you're fronting a blockade, you know what you're going to do? You're going to give a battalion of excuses. The weather, the people, here this and that, and the qualifications and all that stuff. It is fear that is appearing in form of a blockade, and you're spewing it out in form of excuses. But this did not start when you were born. This started because of experiences, because of reality on the ground, because you try to do something and you faced that fear. Fear is born in us through negative experiences for the most part. For the most part. We mostly learn to fear through what we hear, what we experience, what we see, what we touch. When you are a kid, a red hot stove is, what is that? I mean, you're so curious, you're so confident, and you approach and you hold it, and that's when you realize, yikes! You've just had an experience, and now genuinely, that fear, by the way, I read somewhere, I think I heard Tony Robbins saying that fear can also be a good helper. Because if you are afraid of dying, you will not jump off of a cliff, or not jump off of a building, third floor of a building, because you know what's awaiting. But then again, if you go and take it further, is that this fear also can be unfounded, because it's the one that stops us from succeeding even when we could succeed. We mostly learn to fear through what we hear, what we see, and what we experience. And in order to conquer fear, as well as the blockade that it brings, we need to change our input in terms of our experiences, in terms of what we are listening to, in terms of what we are seeing. During COVID, by the way, people were afraid. People were so much afraid. You know why people were so much afraid? Because 100% the media, they call it liberal or liberty media, was on board with the so-called scientists about this virus from China. And the thing that you needed to do was to turn on the TV. When you turn on the TV, and everyone was home, by the way, because of the lockdowns and all that stuff. Everyone had been sent home. When you turn on the TV, what do you find? You find news about this, news about that, news about this, about COVID, about who died, about how many people have died. Whether those things are true or false, we don't know, but just the things we hear evoke or invoke fear. That's why, by the way, sometimes I don't sit before a TV to honestly watch a news bulletin. My job doesn't allow me to do that. I'm an encourager. It doesn't mean that I'm hiding my head in the sand and I'm blind to the truth. It just means that the media, as it is, doesn't curate everything wholesome. You think that the news that is brought on the media is all the news that there is in this world? It isn't. It is only the negative. But there is a lot of positives going out there. People have invented things. People have helped others. People have been resurrected. People have been given a second chance. Marriages have been saved. I'm telling you, houses have been built. But you don't have that one featured. You only hear, someone, I don't know, has killed who, I don't know that. What diseases come. That's all you hear. And the more you hear these negatives, the more they prop up these blockades. The economy is bad. The economy is bad. The economy is bad. Fuel prices are going up. They will always go up whether you listen to the news or not. So I don't know why you're sitting there to listen to the negative. It is always going to go up. There is not a day you wake up and you find that inflation is deflation. So change what we hear. Change what we see. Probably we cannot change what we experience, but we can change how we respond to what we experience. Someone said, it will pass, or it came to pass, or it is only temporary. And by the way, it's sometimes very true. If I ask you today, there's something that you are facing maybe 5 years ago, you can't even remember. But 5 years ago, there was a serious situation that you're going through and you thought that was it. Today, you can't even remember. You know what was going on? It was the experience plus illusions and fear coupled together. And that they make us to shrink. And that's how a blockade is normally formed from these experiences. They tell us, man, things are hard, things are tight. So we sit tight, we save, we don't give, we don't venture out, we don't try out things because the fear of failure or the fear of this or the fear of that. Well, we are going to look at another attitude that can come to us because of experiences.
Thank you for listening to Life Signatures Radio. If you enjoyed today's show, subscribe to Life Signatures Radio on iTunes, Stitcher, or visit our website at lifesignatures.libsyn.com. Life Signatures Radio, fresh, clean, and inspiring.